Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of Lunch with Lunsford.
Woo!
Woo! Love it. How's everyone doing today? We hope everything is good.
Yeah, look at the participants just piling in.
I know, I love that.
How great.
I can't tell if it's that my Zoom's a little funky today, of course, but I'm glad that you
Amazing
coming in. Love it.
Well, a big welcome to Manuela Goyanes.
Oh, yay! Brenna Nicely. I know Brenna Nicely.
And it's great.
Hi, Brenna.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh, hi, Maria. She says in the chat. Wonderful. Guys, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties on my end with some lag, but we're so happy to have you all join us for another episode. We're so grateful to Maria for joining us. Maria is the artistic director of Woolly Mammoth Theater Company in Washington, D.C. So she and Mark will chat as usual for about 40 to 45 minutes before Mark opens up the floor to questions and answers. If you have questions at any point, you can submit them using the chat feature or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to disappear in about a minute. We're just going to give folks a little bit more time to trickle in before we begin. So thanks for joining us, Maria, and thank you, Mark, for being the best weekly host.
Yeah, we'll see.
Little did you know that was part of the job description when you took the gig at A.R.T.
I think in the last 6 weeks, we've all discovered such new things about what we can capably do. And B,
yes, the answer is yes.
These are strange times. Maria, I've had the Lazors have been on, and then I also had Whitney White on 1 week, and they have both confirmed that they are collaborating on a theme song for Lunch with Lunsford. So I had really hoped to roll that out today, but alas, we'll see.
It will come.
Yeah, it will.
All right, friends, I'm going to disappear and turn the show over to the two of you. Thank you again so much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I'll see you next week.
Great.
My goodness, that's a lot of participants. How exciting.
I know, very exciting. Hi, Maria.
Hi, Mark. Nice to see you.
It's so good to see you, too.
It's been forever.
It has. It has been way too long. I know, and we're always like ships in the night.
No, it's true. You're always running to the next thing, but I'm always texting you because I have to talk to you about something. Right. And then we steal the 5 minutes to talk about a project, and then it all comes together magically.
I know. It's. I'm like one of the worst people when I visit other places as well. Mm-hmm. Of like, I will go to a city and then think, oh, I should tell this person who lives here that I'm here.
Oh, totally.
And I do it like in that moment. Which, I obviously was just in DC and got to see Shipwreck, which is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
And I remember I texted you like, oh, by the way, I'm in town coming to your theater. So we'll figure it out one of these days for sure. So I really wanted to both just like talk about your history as a producer, but also talk about these times and talk about them in sort of like an energetic, hopeful way, if that can be found.
Yes.
I knew you were the person to talk about that.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah. It's actually one of the things I've been thinking a lot about. And we actually have added to our staff meetings a bucket of abundance. So basically we can talk like every single agenda that we have. At the bottom of the agenda is the word abundance. And we always take 5 to 10 minutes at the end of every staff meeting to just share like anything that's inspired us, anything that sort of allows us to think sort of like, in an open way rather than this like, oh God, this is really hard way. And it's been really useful.
Yeah. So, sometimes I think it's always helpful to go back to the beginnings or like the origin story, which I know sounds so like epic.
The Deuteronomy.
Exactly. But I would love for you just to talk about sort of even what was the force that drew you into the theater, right? What was the siren that sort of brought you into the fold, starting out as an artist and thinker?
Oh, it's a fascinating thing. My mom was in a production of Oliver at the church, and I played one of the orphans. And my light bulb hadn't turned on yet. I think I don't even remember what grade I was in. I was definitely in middle school. and and I just remember, so she sang, I don't even remember who she played. I haven't seen Oliver basically since, but she sang Where Is Love in her very accented English, and she would sing it at home. And I loved it. I thought it was so wonderful it was just wonderful to be part of that play, etc. But, my light bulb hadn't really sort of turned on where I was like, maybe I could do this. And I was a major reader. I would just read books all the time and be so interested in sort of these imagined worlds. So I didn't actually really go into the theater until I got to college. So I went to Brown University, and that's where I met Oscar Eustace, and I got involved in production workshop, which is the student theater there. And I loved it, and every moment of it I loved. I had a couple of run-ins with the theater beforehand in high school, but most of it was like, I don't know, going to Usher Cabaret on Broadway without Dr. Richardson, as sort of forcing my parents to go and do that with me. My first play, a professional play, was actually in high school. It was Craig Lucas's Blue Window.
Wow.
Yeah, totally. And I don't know what I was thinking. I have to say, it's like the hubris of being a kid or something like that, where I was watching it. Is literally, I'm watching my first professional theater production, and I was like, I could do this better. I was like, who are you, Maria, that you can do this better? I went back to the playbill and sort of looked to see who had directed it and who was in it, because I hadn't remembered. And I was like, it was Allison Janney and like Joe Mantello had directed it. The chances are high that I could not have done it better. There is very, very little chance that I would have been able to. But I had this like sort of like something had bit me, just like classic story, something bit me. And so it made me want to do that that's when my light bulb turned on and was the theater.
But sometimes that hubris is like the greatest driving force into the thing.
Oh, for sure. Oh,
because otherwise
for sure.
it's too scary. Like, how would you ever enter?
Yeah, that's right.
That's really incredible. I wonder, because when I talk to like other people who are producers or dramaturgs who have I think these, what I would say, jobs in the theater that we don't traditionally learn about.
I should have had a woolly mug. I'm so not a good brand spokesperson.
I do have my movement theater.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, the movement.
A little plug for the movement theater company. But these jobs that, like, at least I didn't in the Midwest, I didn't even know these were things in the theater, like that one could be a producer for a nonprofit, or that one could be a dramaturg, or so many other roles, right? And so I wonder too, like, is it that moment of Brown that you thought, oh, like producing is the whole enchilada, like that's the whole thing? Like, what was sort of that moment for you?
Yeah, that moment happened a little later, actually. So my parents are immigrants from Spain and the Dominican Republic. I'm Spaninican. I identify as Latina. The reason why I bring that up is because, I didn't necessarily, after college, I needed to not ask them for money. And so I was figuring out what to do in the theater, and I got an internship at Trinity Rep that paid $60 a week, plus gave you housing and paid your bills. So I was like, yeah, I can live on $60 a week, ramen all the way. Yeah, I can do that. But at the time, I was still thinking that maybe I would direct. I started to direct when I was in college, and I was enjoying it because I like being bossy. And I basically was thinking that maybe I would go to grad school or do something like that. Mm-hmm. But I had all these sort of producing skills that I didn't realize were producing skills from producing all of this student theater, that when I got to Trinity Rep, I was just like doing a whole bunch of things and suddenly being like, wait a minute, is this what producing is? And Oscar, who was the artistic director at the time, gave me my first professional gig. He hired me from a literary intern to be the associate producer of Trinity Repertory Company. I was 22 years old. I mean, he was paying me nothing, right? So it was like all job title, you know what I mean? Right. But the point is, he got a lot out of me for that amount. And I was just so hungry and ready to go. And what the existential crisis that happened for me then was just like, if I went to grad school for directing or something, I would want this job when I got out. So why am I going to go? Right. So I actually don't have a graduate degree. I'd like my graduate degrees to be honorary for anyone who's listening. I'm working on it. Whatever small university wants to bring me out. But the point being is that I had this moment where I was like, I knew that I wanted to make my living as a producer because I did not actually have, there's something about artists. They
Yes.
have to be so obsessive over what it is that they're making. And ultimately, that obsession is whatever it is that you're given, right? Because a lot of the time, directors don't get to choose their projects. You have to actually sort of be far along in your career to actually get to choose your project. So I just felt to myself, I was like, it wasn't just the grad school thing. It was also like, yo, if I go to grad school and become a director, it means somebody's gonna like hire me to go to like Cleveland to do Moon for the Misbegotten, and I'm gonna have to take it because I'm gonna have to pay my bills. And like, I'm sorry, y'all, you don't want to see my production of Moon for the Misbegotten. It's not my play. Not my play. Love reading that play. Love O'Neill. You do not want to see my production of that. So I thought to myself, I don't know that I'm obsessive enough about finding my way into any project. And therefore, I actually need to make a living producing. But I don't feel like a frustrated director. I feel like actually I don't have the patience anymore to sit there and be like, no, fix this line, this kind of thing. But maybe actually as I mature, and get older, maybe I'll go back to it at some point, but I haven't missed it.
No, I think there's something really key in that, right? Because there is this like way that you have to dial into the artistic process without having to want to control it, and to be able to empathize and understand and see through the eyes of the artist you're working with, but also be able to like control all the other factors around them that are affecting how their work gets done.
Oh, for sure.
I think it's so exciting about producing.
But I also think about, when a playwright is working on a project or when an actor is working on a project, there's a degree, I keep going back to the idea of obsession or artistic obsession, where you're seeing the world through the lens of the project that you're making. And you have to be sort of willing to dive into that world and really sort of turn it around in your head and live with it. And I'm too curious. I have too much energy. I need to be able to actually have lots of different things that I can move in and out of. That's sort of more my genetic makeup,
Yeah. No, I mean, this sort of leads perfectly into something I wanted to get into, which was 13P. 13P, this organization that came in the early 2000s, this like sort of consortium of playwrights who wanted to be in control of the production of their own work, right? And you became sort of a key part of that organization, helping produce that work. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about sort of how 13P came about and your role in that.
Yeah.
I have a great little clip to share when we're ready, sort of from the oral history of the company.
Oh, cool. Perfect. Well, let me give you a little framework and then you can share the clip.
Great.
So when I was at Trinity Rep, I stayed for a minute, but I'm from New York and I don't drive, and all of my friends had graduated, and I just was like, I can't live in Providence, Rhode Island anymore. So I ended up going back to home to New York and living in my parents' basement. And on certain summers, I went to the O'Neill Playwrights Conference, and I stage managed actually, and I was like in the literary department, etc. And that's how I met Rob Hendel and Madeline George. And it was around that time, 2002, that they were cooking up this idea, because what was happening in the field of new play development was that essentially everybody was getting reading after reading after reading of a play, and nobody was saying yes to just going into rehearsal for the play. It felt like too much of a risk, maybe, or something like that. There was a, one of the big impetuses was that, Clean House, before it was done, Sarah had 13 readings of Clean House before somebody actually took it. Yeah. And it was like, what? And then she had to deal with all these different notes from artistic directors and like how to fix her play to get it to be produced or any of that kind of stuff. It's just a mess. So these artists wanted to take matters into their own hands. They had a group of them that they asked to bring one more person in. So Madeline and Rob basically started to ask folks. And they had 14 writers, but Gina Gianfrido was busy and couldn't commit to being a part of it. So it ended up being 13. And so it was 13P, 13 playwrights, 13 productions, etc. And the mission is to do one play by each of them. and then end, which we did. It took us 9 years and about $500,000, but we were able to do it. And the other thing that I guess I would say is each of the playwrights was the artistic director during their production of their play. So what that meant was they get to choose their collaborators. They get to, actually like however much they wanted to be involved in marketing and press and that kind of stuff, or whatever, they get to call the shots. And then that doesn't really happen that much.
No. It's also like the finite nature of that, right? Like we're an organization that's going to exist to do these things. And when that is done, that's it.
It's my favorite thing about 13P. At the beginning, literally everybody and their mother was like, what are you talking about? You're going to implode. You put all of this infrastructure together and you're going to be done. And I can't tell you like how there was something about, so when I was living in my parents' basement and they called me up and they said, remember that idea that we were talking about in the O'Neill? We're going to try and do it, and we need a producer. I didn't know what the F I was doing. I didn't know what they needed. But I thought to myself, well, that would be a very good skill set to learn here in New York. So I might as well say yes, right? And put it together and help them make this theater company. But there was something about it. I don't know if it's because my sprinty nature sort of knows that going through a marathon is where I will actually glean so much of the learning. There was something about it that I knew, even though it was going to be hard, that if I could actually stay with it till the end, I would really have the most learning and reward. So I really, when I went into it, was like, I really want to be in this for the long haul, even though I was hired sort of per project. And actually, there were some shows that I didn't produce. I was more sort of like, overarching kind of supervising person, helping it through.
But it is, I mean, because obviously I love institutions. I've worked with them my whole life. Like institutions are very important, but the whole purpose of this seemed very kind of like anti-institution, not in a bad way.
It's completely anti-institution.
It's anti-institution, right? So you don't want it to go on means it will become more and more like an institution.
Correct.
All right. So this clip we have is actually a conversation around Sheila Callahan's play. And talking, the reason I picked this is because there's a great conversation here about like how to make the thing with only so many resources, which is going to become sort of part of our conversation as we go on. But I felt this really kind of got to that in a
just way. For the viewers, I had a terrible sinus infection during the filming of this. FYI. Okay. Nice and sick. But the show must go on.
It must. Well, I don't know. Now in our COVID world.
It's true, actually. That's going to change. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Let's see.
While we went through that process of rebuilding.
Oh, I think I did not start exactly the place I wanted to. Here we go. Okay.
Of our fundraising.
Sheila Callahan, P number 7, Crawfade to White. I felt in a safe place with 13P because of the people who were in it and because of the idea of it. Whereas they were in support of the idea of we could do whatever we wanted to. And so I felt free to make choices that were in keeping with the script that I wanted to make. But that wasn't about like taking risks. It was just about feeling safe. Sheila had wanted to do a site-specific piece, and it was this, it's an odd play for her. It was a departure for her, very environmental and atmospheric. Well, one thing that we were sort of protected from, which I find really interesting, was money. I mean, we could be the artistic director, but we didn't really have to be responsible for budget. I mean, we were told how much we were able to have, and I knew what the numbers were. But I was never told I couldn't have something because we didn't have enough money. What I was told was we would have this version of it because of the amount of money we can put into it.
I think it's, again, because I felt like we wanted to do things right, I always tried to keep the 13 playwrights out of it from a financial point of view.
I explained the budget to them. I explained how much people were going to make. So if you decide to do a play with 40 characters, that changes the amount that people are going to make because the budget stays, the bottom line has to stay the same, or else we can't do the next show. So a a lot of it for the artistic director is also making it clear to them that they are the emotional figurehead for the company during the time of their show. So they really, so many people are doing this for no money or for the experience of it, that they really need to make sure that they feel the connection to why they're doing it. One of the virtues of 13
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's right. This is the struggle that I feel like we're in all the time. And we want to give the artist everything that they need to make this the best production that we could conceive. But that's not reality always. We have to do it with what we have.
Oh, for sure. And, it's so funny to me because when I got to the public, so I was running 13P basically at the same time that I was at the public theater, sort of working my way up there. And the number of zeros on the balance sheet at the public compared to the number of zeros on 13P, it was just like, every playwright, I think, Anne Washburn's play was the first play, was in The Internationalist, cost us $28,000. In that play, I will say, was Heidi Schreck. She played the lead, one of the leads.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I remember really clearly there was a moment towards the end of Tech where Ken Rushmall, who was directing it, said, Heidi really hates her hair right now and really needs to go get it colored. It doesn't work. She needs a haircut, etc., whatever. And so we need to pay for it. And I was like, I didn't budget for that. I don't know.
Right.
We're going to have to go over budget, that kind of thing or whatever, which is hilarious because I was like, what is it, a couple $100, that kind of stuff. Whereas at the public, the cost of building a set, the cost of, getting somebody, it's just like exponentially different. And so for me, that's also been true in terms of the going from the public to the woolly too. It's just sort of like marveling at how resourceful and innovative so many theater companies are to make the money go as far as possible. And that, I think, is one of the things that I think Sheila's talking about in this clip, is that basically, like, we were at 13P, like, for example, Lucy Thurber was like, I want to do my 40-person show called Monstrosity, and I never wanted to open because I don't want reviews of this. I just want to be able to understand what this play is. And so we were like, okay, well then we don't have to do 4 weeks. We'll do 2 weeks and we'll pay 40 people, but that means you're going to have a $5,000 set. That sound good? And then they were like, yeah. It also meant that, like, Peter Cassander, who made the set, had to paint it.
Right. But those wagers are, I don't know, like that sort of back and forth, I feel like, is.
The horse trading still happens, right? It still happens in our jobs right now. It's not like we don't do that, right? The fact is that your horse trading, the level of what it is that people are willing to do is different depending on the size of the organization and also their livelihood. And I really believe in this culture of paying people and making sure that people are getting paid, even artists who are, being asked to be a part of something, that kind of stuff. Like, we did this virtual party recently and, asked these company members to shoot a video of, like, what Woolly means to them and stuff. And we were like, they literally have no income right now. We're raising money. So it was like, what's it to us to give them $100 for being a part of the thing, right? Like, yes, it all adds up, but, like, short-term loss, long-term gain kind of stuff. And I think that with 13P, there was so much of that sort of scrappiness of, like, you just have to jump in and make the thing happen. With Sheila's show, I will say, just a quick anecdote, we did bite off too much. I will say, one of the things she wanted to do was, so it was Curl Fade to White, and she wanted to do it site specifically. And we found this place called the Ideal Glass Gallery. It's still there in the East Village. And they've used things there. And they gave us a real discount off of rent if we put up a lighting grid. Now, I don't know how to put up a lighting grid, nor do I know how to actually tap into the electricity through Con Ed or the New York City power system. I didn't know how to rate this thing, like safety. Like, I didn't know what the F we were doing. I have to say, I have to shout out Eric Southern. He is a huge reason why we were able to actually get that thing up and rated and, like, make it happen in a way that was actually safe, And I don't even think he was working on the show. He was just doing it for me as a favor.
Yeah.
But he was like, he would go to the at the end of the block and go to the telephone pole and be like, "Where's that wire going to?"
Oh my God.
That was like what we were doing. That was too much. Trying to put up a lighting grid with volunteer labor, basically, that was too much.
It's I used to like make those suggestions when I first started A.R.T. We'd be like, well, I don't know if we're going to be able to do X, Y, and Z because we don't have enough carpenters in the call. And I was like, oh, I can come down and run the saw. And they're like, no, you can't. And they were like, running it in your dad's barn when you were 16 is a lot different.
Well, but like this is the thing. This was the rude awakening that I had on my first day at Woolly Mammoth, right? So at the Public Theater, right, we have ops team, the amazing Izzy Figueroa and his team basically like clean the space, make sure the AC is on, make sure everything is working and that kind of stuff. So we don't even have to think about it, right? I get to Woolly Mammoth. I come early. It's my first day of work. It's 9:30 in the morning. I open the door and I'm like, who's that guy with the mop and the bucket? Isn't that our IT guy? And then suddenly like our CFO comes in and there's water everywhere. And it was a huge flood from the restaurant next door. And literally it covered the whole, thousands of dollars of damage, by the way, it ended up being, we had to do insurance and stuff. And literally my first day of work was me, like knee deep in, gross water with the managing director, Megan Pressman, with basically the rest of the staff cleaning it. And I was like, oh, this is like, you can't get more different from where I came from.
Right. It's kind of amazing.
Who's going to do it?
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the public, but I also want to make sure we get to Woolly because I love Woolly. I came to A.R.T. from DC and I'm like such a sort of fangirl of Woolly Mammoth. But we met when I first started producing at A.R.T. I think it was probably Father Comes Home from the Wars was the first conversation you and I had.
Oh, totally. And that whole travels debacle.
Yes. Our first conversation was a little bit of an argument, I believe.
I bet it was. Yeah. Because I was like, ain't no way they're getting on a bus.
Yep.
And you're like, they got to get on the bus. And I was like, I don't think they're getting on the bus.
You were like, good luck.
Yeah, I was like, they're going to want to take the train.
Yeah, they did not end up taking the bus, I will report. So, there's so much to talk about, and we could talk about so many productions that came during the time of the public, but I think one of the things that I wanted to speak to is in your time there, sort of your experience in coming in, I think as a line producer, and growing to being the director of producing.
Artistic associate, actually.
Artistic associate.
Last hire from George Wolfe. And as luck would have it, my previous boss at Trinity Rep got the job. If it had been someone else, I don't know if I would have stayed.
Sure.
Hey, I could have been on the chopping block. But yeah, I started as an artistic associate.
But then had a career that led you to like the director of producing, artistic planning. And so in that time, I mean, I know just from my vantage point at 9 years at A.R.T., you see an organization change so much. But not only that, you see the way in which artists are approaching their work change so much.
Yes,
and I wonder if you could speak a little bit in that time at the public, where I feel, there were so many new models. Public Works came out of that time, which is such an incredible piece. You can talk a little bit about just like seeing the industry shift from that seat at such a prominent institution, and how you also saw that manifest what the artists were doing.
Oh yeah, it's such a great question. So I can't, 13P can't take all the credit for this, but it certainly was part of a wave that led to producers wanting to find ways to make it, make going into production a sort of lower risk value, right? So when I got to the public and I was working on 13P, the idea here was instead of development and all these readings, just call it rehearsal and, put it up. Because that's how playwrights really learn what their play is. And it was over the course of, I think it was like 6 or 7 years. What happened over the course of that time was you saw all of these theater companies, big theater companies, start second stages. So Roundabout Underground started, second stage Uptown started, Public Labs and Public Studio started, right? Essentially, other ways to sort of think about production in a just a more centralized manner, right? So these weren't bare bones productions by any means, because what is bare bones, right? You still need people to make stuff. You still have a set. You have a sort of a sense of production value, but there were different kinds of parameters, right? And the thing about it is that parameters always creep. You and I know this, right? They always creep up and up and up. Like you can start with something, and unless you're really, really diligent about it. I mean, even 13P, I can't tell you how many times it was like, should we do this for 13P or should we try this for 13P? And it was like, no, we are a company that is only meant to produce these plays.
Right.
If we're not producing these plays, we are not actually doing the mission of the company. Anything else is extra. And that is actually very different from what most theaters, certainly at Woolley. I mean, I'll be the first to say that I'm one of the most opportunistic people you'll ever meet. You know what I mean? And everything will fit in some way, shape, or form, or I'll try and figure out a way to make it fit in. So I think part of it is that we ended up getting a massive, just more productions were happening for playwrights, and it wasn't like the only people who were getting produced, which was essentially what was happening in 2001, 2002, 2003, were like folks who had already been produced before or had a relationship with the company. It suddenly became that you had another way in for a younger writer or a less established writer or a writer who didn't have a relationship with the company to get in.
Yeah.
Over the course of that time then, so I feel like that was the first sort of half of my time at the Public. And then the golden age of TV started to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so essentially those writers who were getting in, right? And suddenly were, by virtue of the fact that they had a show in the Roundabout Underground, getting gigs, writing gigs on other shows.
Yeah.
And so you didn't necessarily have to be suddenly on the main stage, quote unquote, or whatever it is. You could, it was a calling card one way or the other because you had been produced, you had been chosen to be produced. And so you get just a ton of people doing tons of different amazing kind of work, staffing. I remember when Sheila got on Shameless, it was a big deal. Sheila Callahan, and then a number of other folks who were in the theater. And now it's sort of changed to the fact that like you get a production before you even graduate school.
Right.
I mean, the last 2 years, I'm looking at Dave Harris, who was at Humana before he even was in his second year at UCSD. I'm looking at Jeremy Harris before. That would happen before then, but it happened very rarely. I mean, I would say the only people who had that, was like Terrell and Brandon, Terrell McCraney and Brandon Jacobs Jenkins. But now it's way more Lily Padilla. I mean, you can just go through, and those folks actually knew that they were going to have productions before they actually left their grad program.
Well, it kind of broke down this like theater artist thing, right? Like I felt like we got more into this. These are artists. They're writers, they're singers, they're composers, they're dancers, and where the theater is bringing them to the table, not through specifically being a music theater performer or being a playwright, but are really blowing the doors off that.
Well, what's so exciting about the showrunner conversation, right, is like when I look at somebody like Tracy Scott Wilson and the work that she did, not just on her plays, The Good Negro and Buzzer, etc., Philadelphia Story, but also then on The Americans. She's a major staff writer on The Americans, did such amazing work on that show. And what it makes me think about, just to go back to our conversation about 13P, is, the medium of TV, the person who gets to fire people is the writer.
Yeah.
In a film, it's the director.
Right.
But in TV, it's the writer is holding the cards. It's the writer's intellectual property, right? Yeah. And so this is, one of the things that I got into a fight about with one time. She would love this. It's not a bad thing. Marcia Norman, who she was running Juilliard at the time, and I was on a panel discussion And she was just saying, like, well, I just tell my Juilliard students that, like, go make your money in TV and then, come back to the theater. And I was just like, Marsha, wait, please stop. What you're basically saying is that we're not a viable industry. Like,
Yeah.
you have, like, literally the most exciting talent in the whole of the American theater at your fingertips at a place like Juilliard. And you're basically saying, like, you are never going to be able to make a living in the theater. It's not a viable industry. This is where this pandemic comes in, right?
Right.
It's like this basically shows what a tight margin we work under to be able to actually make it work. And this is the part where I want to say I think that we've done ourselves a disservice to connect ourselves to economic models and always talk about who are the people that we're serving, or in a transactional sense, tickets, things like that, rather than actually talking about what the value of culture is. Because Lord knows that Boston and Cambridge would be a lesser place without A.R.T in it. And that is not just about people served. Right?
I mean, it kind of goes in.
It's about,
Yeah, it goes into this interesting moment, actually. And I'm drawing this corollary. I don't know if it exists, but I think about you coming into an organization like 13P in 2002, 2003, where it would occur to me that sort of after effects of 9/11 are still present in how we're gathering and how we're making art, especially in New York. And now you find yourself leading this sort of nationally recognized, innovative, incredible theater company in this pandemic. So it's sort of like, wow, here we are again. Obviously, living this in the middle of it happening. But I think a lot about Wooly. I already said I'm a huge fan of it. There are actually a lot of people at A.R.T who used to work in DC who are huge Wooly super fans. So we talk about it a lot, and I think it made us really excited for your appointment there, because there's so much of the artistic fabric of Wooly that I think A.R.T we share aesthetically, and now even more so with you there already. I know we both presented 600 Highwaymen, The Fever, which was an incredible production, and of course
What to Send Up.
Collaborated on What to Send Up, and the movement.
And we have other projects that I'm hoping that we will be able to do together.
Yeah. We're talking all the time, and so I wonder, it's interesting to me to hear you talk about how that sort of mission of Woolly Mammoth as this national innovator has manifested for you, and how you have held that central to not only your curation, but also the culture of the organization, and if you've made shifts or kind of where that has sat for you.
Yeah, it's such a great question. So what I want to tell everybody is that Woolly Mammoth, so the Woolly Mammoth stands, the fans that are loving Woolly Mammoth, at A.R.T are loving Woolly Mammoth, right? Because of what Howard Showitz built over the course of 38 years. So I've been there a year and a half. So I can talk about what I see as the future, but I also want to tell you that, like, I'm building on a legacy that is just so principled, radical, incredibly adaptable, and exciting. And frankly, it was the only place that I applied to go run, because I was called by the headhunter or whatever firm they were using, and I didn't need to leave the public. I was having a good time.
Yeah.
I was well paid. I got to work with
doing Hamilton, doing Fun Home.
the thoroughbreds of the American theater. I mean, it was like an amazing place. But when I thought about the possibility of running a theater company and sort of stepping into that, I thought to myself, it had to be the right one for me. And part of that is because that it had the values that I held up, and that it wouldn't be a fight for me to have to sort of hold up those values once I got the job, right? So part of what's so difficult in a bigger place or whatever it is because the machinery of the thing, it's like an ocean liner. Trying to move it is like, you move it a little bit by degrees or something like that, And I wanted to be in a theater company that was a little bit more like a speedboat. And could actually sort of maneuver and turn and pivot. And that's sort of one of the things that I think Wooly has often done. It's been a theater company, not just, it has a national reputation because of the artists that it works with, but also because of the community work that it does. right? The connectivity program was created 10 years ago now. Can you believe it? It's 10 years old. And it came out of this big conference that was done in DC that was called Who's in Your Circle? And it was about democracy and community and theater and how to best actually reflect, the kind of equitable, diverse, participatory democracy that we all want to be a part of.
Yeah. When it's coming into institutions, I think institutions in general, like the values, I'm so glad you brought up the values because it's so important, I think, and that values alignment is so essential in I think everything we do. And I think you had an experience coming into Wooly with a board member at the beginning of this, when you're really sort of building on those values. That I wonder if you want to talk about a little bit. I found it as such an inspirational story. That's why I bring it up, because I thought it was such like courage and commitment to value on your part.
You're talking about the board member.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So sorry, I was just looking to see what the Q&A stuff are, because that's a cool feature. I hadn't actually seen it yet. So one of the things that happened early on in when I started, so I started September 2018, I was meeting with board members, right, and doing the rounds. And at the same time that we were doing the rounds, one of the things that Wooly had already incorporated was actually pronouns, right? So essentially being able to, when you announce your name, say what pronoun you'd like to go by, which feels like an incredibly inclusive, wonderful thing to do for folks, particularly for the trans and non-binary communities. Like, yeah, it's like no brainer, right? Doesn't hurt me to call you your right pronoun.
Right.
So what we did, our marketing director wrote to the board and the staff, because one of the last parts, like we had already introduced it on first rehearsals, we already introduced it in our signatures, we just continued to introduce it, and one of the last things was the website. And so he wrote to everybody to say, hey, we're going to put pronouns on the website, just want to make sure that we have your right ones, will you just share your pronouns with us and put it in? And one of the board members was like, he made like an off-color joke. It was basically like, trying to be funny, but not funny at all. And what was inappropriate was that the joke was responding to the staff member, and also went to everybody in the marketing department, including someone who had transitioned. So I was like, this is not good. But because I was new, I thought to myself, well, I'm having I had lunch with this person. We had a good time. I feel like I got his number. You know what I mean? Like, I get it. I should just like write to him and be like, listen, that was like not great. If you have trouble, just come to me. I'm sure that you wanted to make a joke or something like that, but like, I can't imagine that your intention was to hurt anybody's feelings. And it was met with hurt feelings. So it's not great. You do not have to do anything, but I just want you to clock that you got this. And and it was like a really well-worded email. Like, I worked hard on it, right?
We spent hours on those emails.
Yeah. And I got, can I curse?
Yes, no FCC worries here.
Okay, great. So I got a 3-sentence email. It was, fuck you, I quit. And the last sentence was, while you're in New York, go shopping for a sense of humor. Because I was in New York at the time and watching plays. And I sent that to my board chair, and this is the values of Wooly Mammoth. Like, he was a board member, he gave a certain amount of money. We could have, went back and said, because we needed the money or whatever, and tried to sort of amend the thing. But the fact of the matter is, he wasn't even willing to have the conversation. And there was no professional courtesy in cursing at someone who just started a job 4 weeks ago as the artistic director.
Right.
Not great.
Yeah.
So she wrote back and she said, I'm going to write to him and I'm going to ask him, tell him, he says I quit. Can I accept your resignation? And she did. And he was like, yes. And that's all he said. And that's it. And so I haven't had to deal with him since, but like, what a dumb, like, you would think that at Wooly Mammoth, like, a place as progressive and radical, that why was that person on the board to begin with when it was going to be hard for them to actually sort of say the right pronouns for people? Like, I don't get it. What was the mismatch there? And did that change over time? Like, I don't understand, you know?
But there's like a really yes, I totally agree, and I think the way that story plays out, in that like you share this with your board chair, and your board chair is like, okay, let me just make sure that's his resignation. Like, there's no agonizing about the way forward. We all know, that's I think that's incredible that a lot of people don't always get to have that sort of support.
Well, so this is the question is I also think that that's possible in a smaller theater company. So in a larger theater company, say the conversation was they were $1 million donor.
Right.
Would it have been so easy? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
My crystal ball says no.
Yeah, probably true. So I want to get into these questions because there's a lot here that I think is interesting.
Yeah, great.
But the final thing I guess I just want to hear your thoughts about are, we're looking at this moment, and I know that Woolie's facing this. I know that A.R.T is facing this, where I feel like all I do is sit in 3 days of meetings with scenario planning, and then on the fourth day learn that all those scenarios aren't viable, and so we start doing the next set of scenario planning, right? But I wonder if we can like zoom out from that a little bit, and talk a little bit about what challenges you think we as an industry face in the next few years, or not even just challenges, but like what opportunities exist in this moment, as places charged with like gathering people to tell stories, which we can't do right now, at least not physically. And I would love to hear kind of what you're thinking in terms of what this moment is telling us to reflect on and what opportunities we have.
It's such a great question because you're already doing it, right? And I love focusing on the opportunities because I feel like I'm in the challenges all the time, right? And I feel, certainly the folks in our field are some of the most creative, original, innovative folks. And so, if there's a time to have any conversation right now, my hope is it starts with, are you okay? Are you safe? Are you healthy? What can I do to help you stay safe and healthy? And then the second conversation, I hope, is, so what are we doing? So what are we doing? And I think that a forum like this is an amazing thing. I am of the mind that our society has lost something by not having a gathering place, like a place in the theater. I am of the mind that place is irreplaceable in the ways that we experience the theater. That doesn't mean that there are not new forms and new ideas and new mediums that we should take advantage of and think about how to utilize and/or for what they are, like and/or like create with moving forward. Because I think, the values of, we are community connectors. We are culture creators. There's ways to create culture and conversation and dialogue that don't actually necessitate being right in front of each other. And a big part of what it is that we do is being right in front of each other. And so I do still hold that candle of like, we do actually need to think about the scenario when we can get in a room together again and what that looks like. Because that's, to me, as we were talking about what theater is supposed to mean in the society, et cetera, whatever, and help reflect to us our humanity. And part of that is reflecting our humanity with a person in front of you and people beside you. Making sure that that's still in the horizon, right? But the thing that I will say in terms of opportunities and stuff is like, I just watched the web series that Roundhouse Theater in this area just started. So they hire a playwright an episode, and they have the actors, and they did the SAG-AFTRA rates, and they're just creating a web series about funny, and it's like a comedy. It's like a totally like, it feels like a sitcom. So the first episode was, that Snapchat filter that turns folks into a potato.
Right. Yes.
The whole episode, it was written by Alexandria Petri, who is a great comic writer. It was all about this guy who like turned himself into a potato on Zoom, has a meeting coming up and doesn't know how to get off of it. And it was super fun and funny. But that's not the same as Roundhouse producing play, right? So part of, I think, what's so difficult is like, you have the people who are like, how can we take what we normally do and move it and transfer it to a different medium? And I'm of the mind that is not actually the challenge in front of us. I'm of the mind that the challenge in front of us is that how do we take those things that we need to do in the space and plan for them, and then what are the other things that we can be doing to actually be of service to our community, right? And that to me is like, there's so many levels of that. Like for me, one of the biggest levels is the facility. Woolly Mammoth is empty right now. It's driving me nuts. And so what I'm wanting to do, so we did a virtual party last Monday. And one of the things that we did was we actually kept all of the equipment up, and the Tahoe Justice Center used it for their virtual benefit also. And so, so it's like, basically like they did the social distancing, was less than 10 people, and they were able to actually raise money for, to fight domestic abuse, So like, what are we doing to be valuable members of our community? And then what kind of content, like Lunch with Lunsford, can we create that actually continues to foster a connection? And it's not just about visibility. If it was only just about visibility, it's like, I don't know, take out Facebook ads. Like,
I mean, it's like so much of our cultural practice like goes back to just the art of storytelling, right? The oral history, the like being around the campfire, being around whatever. And I do one of my daily walks that I do with my mask on, of course, takes me past Oberon, and it's like you can just feel the spirits coming out of there, and you're like, I have to stop walking by here because this is too heartbreaking at this point.
Yeah.
You feel that bleeding out.
Yeah, and I think I think it's okay to mourn that and live in that. I think it's totally okay, and I also think that like for us to survive, we're going to have to figure out different ways of revenue generation if it's not going to be tickets in a theater.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to try and work that out. And I do believe in us and in our colleagues to be able to be innovative in that way. I do.
Okay, I want to ask a couple questions because now I've taken all the time for us. I've been the rudest moderator.
What the hell?
I know. This is a great question from Donald Mitchell. How did Woolly get its name?
Oh gosh. Well, you know what I should do is you should sign up for the email newsletter at Woolly, because we're doing a little, I don't know why they're leaf blowing now. Why are they leaf blowing now? I just don't understand. Anyway, so Woolly Mammoth, basically, there's a whole skit that we did about how Woolly got its name that you will enjoy, that we're going to be sending out from the gala that we did, the virtual party that we did. But essentially, Howard and his co-founder, Roger Brady, drank Carlo Rossi one night and wrote down every single possible name. And it was like planets, it was like every single Shakespeare character, and it was like flowers, and then there was like Woolly Mammoth was on there.
That's amazing. I found an email once that I don't think I was supposed to find, that was all the potential names for Oberon before they decided on Oberon. And there are some doozies on there. There are some doozies that I will not.
I mean, I'm not kidding. Woolly Mammoth could have been Primrose Theater Company, Hapless Theater Company, Millennium Theater Company. I mean, and then they were like,
Oberon was almost named the Pachyderm.
Oh my God, amazing.
it's so wild. Okay, let me get at least one more in here. I'm quickly scanning. Our dear friend Paul Lucas has been like having this lovely chat in the chat here.
I love that, producing your own work for dummies. That sounds like a revenue generating idea.
Oh, that's the truth. Hi, Paul. We're gonna say hello to you both.
Hi, Paul.
So from Llama, what advice do you have for performers in the upcoming year?
Yeah, this is going to be really hard for gig artists. So I would look into voiceover work. Right now there are a ton of different folks who are doing that, going into the podcast business and various things like that. So that is an industry that is growing. And I would really suggest, because I know a lot of artists who, a friend of mine in New York basically does like all the audiobooks for like these vampire YA novels. and that's how she makes her living for the year. And then she can get to choose whatever play she wants to or whatever it is. So it feels like it's harder to get into than it actually is my my feeling. It just sort of depends on because there's so many different kinds of outlets. It doesn't all have to be like Audible, you know what I mean? That people are using. But that's like a practical thing. I think, in a more spiritual sense, you have to take care of yourself. And so, whatever you can do to get to survive, I know that there is this amazing website now called hireartists.org. Do you know this? Have you heard of this?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that Vallejo put together. And it's basically like, if you need somebody to teach you Mandarin, why don't you consider hiring an artist? Because artists know how to speak Mandarin. You don't have, you know what I mean? And so, and because, artists are in the gig economy, they, first of all, they have a ton of skills. And second of all, why not hire one of them right now? Because it's going to be hard for them to actually get work. So I would say that there's a lot of those kinds of things that are sort of being created that hopefully you can tap into. And then but really, like, how do you take care of your spirit? What do you need to take care of your spirit? Is the most important thing, and that's going to be very specific to each and every one of you.
Yeah. All right, final question here. I'm going to sort of quickly summarize the questions. It's a great question. Young producer working on new work with small budgets, feeling anxious about asking creatives and actors to be a part of the projects, knowing the little money he has to pay them. So he wonders what advice you have on like couching these conversations with artists who you are very aware of their worth and that maybe you can't meet that, and how do you make a proposal to them about an artistic project that you only have so much to offer? Would they
right? But they can say no, right?
Right.
I mean, yeah, never hurts to ask. I guess that's the thing, is like, as long as you're transparent about it and say, one of the things that I often say to directors or young producers and stuff, it's just like, you just want to be in a situation where somebody wants to have that second conversation with you, even if the first one doesn't work out, right? So you want to present yourself in such a way that like the person takes an interest in you, some sort of investment. So part of the way to do that a lot of the time is asking for people for advice. So there's this little, I guess it's an axiom or something, like, when you ask for money, you get advice, but when you ask for advice, you get money.
Right.
I think part of that is maybe if there are big names on that list, maybe one of the things that you do is say, like, do you ask them for advice and say, this is how much I have to pay people. These are the people who I'm interested in getting. Do you think that's even possible? Would you even consider something like this? And see what they say. And then they might be able to actually just tell you how to couch it so that they would be more interested in doing it. And then you will be able to go back to them and say, hey, I couched it how you said. Will you do it for me now?
Yeah, I know. I feel like the amount of times that I've had someone tell me, why didn't you ask me, versus no, I won't do it for that. That outnumbers the no's. And I've had many moments of like, well, I just never thought you would take this contract. Like, I never thought you'd work on a Lord Be Rate. And they're like, of course I would. I am passionate about this play, or I'm passionate about the story. And that's really what drives.
You never know until you ask.
That's the truth. And there's no harm in asking.
There's no harm in asking, unless your ego is that fragile and you can't handle it. Well, and then you got to build up some resilience so that you can ask, or ask somebody who has a little bit more resilience or doesn't care that much to do the asking.
Yeah.
Right.
It's 101. Maria, I am so grateful for having you today. This was a blast.
Thank you.
It's funny. I was saying before we went on, I was like, in all these conversations we've been talking about, like this artist who did this piece at A.R.T. and typically it's a piece that I've line produced. So I was like, oh, I'm just like, whatever. I'm going to bring up this story, bring up that thing. And I was like, oh my God, this conversation with Maria, we could go in so many different directions.
And we could talk about so many different things. Yes.
I think we could probably go for another hour or two.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, day-long workshop if we wanted to.
Yeah.
The proceeds to A.R.T. Suggest a donation and split the proceeds to Willie and A.R.T. or something, and teach everybody how to produce.
What's that Zach Galifianakis series, Between Two Ferns? We could
Yes, we could do that.
We could interview artists and be like,
oh my God, that'd be hilarious. I would love that. That would be so good.
Well, thank you all for joining and watching today too.
Yeah, thank you.
we're so grateful. I mean, I know the both of us for the support of audience and supporters right now is going to be what gets us through this. So spending an hour with you every week is such a blast. Great. Thanks, Maria. Thank all of you.
Thank you. Take care. You all rock. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.